We're back in the studio, man.
Finally, it's been since November.
It's episode 5,
I think.
and
I think so.
yeah, it is episode 5,
Yeah.
and we've had a lot going on, a lot of good stuff.
It's been busy.
Just got back from South Carolina. Last week?
Yep.
Doing some more Hurricane Helene cleanup.
That was a
within
good trip.
Yes.
I feel like we got 9 houses.
Yeah, nine houses.
homes worked on.
9 houses done, 2.5 days, 6
Yep.
guys.
That was fun.
So,
It was a lot of hard work. I came home really sore.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, we're
we
booking
did a
it.
lot more brush dragging than I'm
Right.
happy with.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in backyards and everything. But we also had, kind of one thing about this trip that stood out was, being safety focused.
Very safety minded, yeah.
And that's kind of what this episode's going to be about.
Yeah.
It's kind of a 2-part, not two, but it's one episode, but it's
Yeah.
kind of a dual topic, I guess you could say. We're going to talk about safety.
Yeah.
When running a chainsaw, doing storm work and stuff like that, some basic safety stuff.
Yeah.
Some things that we experience in the field and things that we try to keep at the forefront of our minds while doing this kind of work. But also, unfortunately, it is kind of a more it's a bittersweet episode, right? So Tim Ard, one of our mentors who kind of helped develop our training program and so many training programs across the United States. He's a legend, man.
He was a chainsaw training
guru.
Guru,
man.
That's the right word.
Yeah, he was awesome. He unfortunately passed away recently, from cancer. It was really, really sad situation, but honestly, he left such a big impact, not only in disaster response, but tree care as a whole for safety, that his legacy is going to be remembered for decades to come, because he
we're
kind
going
of
to carry it on.
We absolutely are. He set the standard for that, just safety mindset for disaster response specifically, and chainsaws. So I guess we can talk about a little bit what he preaches as far as safety goes, and kind of what we've adopted.
Yeah.
And we're going to honor Tim in this episode as well.
Absolutely.
So what do you want to talk about first, Tim, or do you want to talk about?
Talk about Tim. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with him and how you got to know him. I mean, I never met him.
Right.
I sat in on one of his online courses and a couple Thursday Night Saws episodes.
Yeah, during his
but really didn't ever
legacy.
get a chance to meet him, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I haven't known Tim for a long time.
Right.
It's been about 2 years, but honestly, in that 2 years, he's kind of changed the trajectory of our organization. That's the kind of person he was.
Absolutely.
You interact with him and you immediately kind of you reevaluate what you're doing as far as chainsaw
Very
safety
quickly.
goes. Yeah, for sure. He wasn't afraid to call you out on anything, which was huge. He's probably one of the best coaches that I've ever experienced in my life. To be able to, in a loving way, call you out on things. And make it feel like he has your best interest, which he did. Have your best interest in mind. So I met Tim about 2 years ago online, actually,
Right.
Through his YouTube channel, Forest Apps. He was posting a lot of content about chainsaw safety, PPE, basic operation, how to tackle different situations, and then also sharpening, chainsaw maintenance. He had a whole just a plethora of different topics to discuss, and I started picking up a lot of little tips and tricks, and just kind of when we talk about wanting to do things at a more professional and higher level, he set a lot of guidelines for those, and so I was starting to pick through those and kind of start implementing those in our organization. But I think the first time we actually got to talk was I wrote a little blog post. It's still up on our website about kind of calculating the 80% rule. He's really big on the 80% rule, which is your hinge length being 80% of the diameter of the tree.
Right. Leaving 10 and 10 on each side.
Right. And I kind of wanted to investigate why is the 80% rule such like a, such a big thing in this industry.
So important.
Yeah, so important. And so I kind of worked the math, went into my CAD software, drew out some tree stumps, and worked through how to, like what is the calculation behind the 80% rule,
right?
And so if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you can read the blog post.
Right.
But I shared that with Tim, and he thought it was really interesting. And he said, "Hey, I'd like you to be on our Thursday night kind of live podcast, or Thursday Night Saws."
Right.
Chris Childs from God's Pit Crews on there, Keith Willingham from Samaritan's Purse, David Breeden from Georgia Tree Masters, and which he's a Husqvarna consultant now. His son runs Georgia Tree Masters, but he's a certified arborist as well. And so there's just kind of this panel of people who are like-minded, safety-oriented, to talk about safety and then other types of chainsaw topics.
Right.
And so every Thursday night, when we could, we'd all get together, hop online, and he'd pick a topic and we'd go through it. People would interact with us and everything like that. So started doing that for several months, and then Tim and I just kind of started bantering back and forth, through text messages, phone calls. I'd pick his brain on certain things, but never attended one of his programs, training programs. I've heard great things about the training programs, just never had the opportunity to kind of schedule that in until last year, actually. He was doing this legacy program, which was 12-week long program. So it was, I think, 11 weeks of online training and consulting. Yeah. It was, I think, 12 of us, 12, me and like 11 other guys in different groups, fire departments, disaster response, tree care, just everything. We would meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. and for an hour we would start developing our own training program, because that's one thing. We had a training program, but it wasn't bad, but it was not. It wasn't full encompassing, and it wasn't structured. In the way that I felt was most beneficial for our volunteers. Yeah. And so the whole legacy program was to develop that kind of program.
And this was his master class.
This was absolutely
everything he'd learned over the decades he's been doing this. Right. He poured into y'all, and then taught you how to develop your own training programs from this.
Right. And I think Tim knew that his days were kind of numbered in the field, especially being sick and everything like that. It was, he wasn't going to be able to do this forever. And so he wanted to make sure that the upcoming generation or the other people in leadership roles within other organizations going forward had this training program, the training program that he has been teaching for, over 30 years, to continue to be able to teach that and not let that, go away. Right. Which I think was super important. And so we did 12 weeks of online, or 11 weeks of online consulting, developing our 5-module program, which we teach now. It's a 3-day course. And then we did 2 days in the field.
Right, and that was in Virginia, right?
Virginia at God's Pit Crew, God's Pit Crew headquarters, basically. That's cool. And it was really, really neat. Big thanks to Chris Childs for opening, his space up for all of us. And I actually got to drive Tim up to Virginia, so I got to spend
a whole nother level.
right. Just constant questions and constant just bantering back and forth on chainsaw safety and stuff. But one thing I do want to mention about Tim was he's very passionate about chainsaws, right? Yeah. But he also knew what was really important, and that's like God and your family. Yeah. He would always make a point to ask, how are you doing spiritually, and how's your family doing? Right. And that was always, we could talk shop. Sure. But let's talk about some important things too. He was genuinely cared about the people that he was training. Yeah. And I really felt that. So it was awesome to be able to drive up to Virginia with him, just him and I, talking shop and everything like that. And then work through this legacy course, drive back. And then, for several months after that, continue the Thursday night saws, and always picked his brain on, what are we doing wrong? Where can we improve? And he was not shy to tell you, hey, he called us out.
There was a picture on our Facebook from
Clarksville, like two years ago.
And he told you to take it down.
Yeah, he was like, that's not a good plan. I was like, you're right, it's not a good plan.
Right.
You know, like,
well, we didn't know.
We didn't know
what we didn't know starting out.
Right. So I mean, his knowledge and just sharing it for free on YouTube. Like, you know, I feel like in the tree care industry, a lot of people. I'm not saying everybody, because there's a ton of amazing arborists on YouTube that share information, but a lot of people like to kind of gatekeep things.
Paywall it.
Right. And it's like, you know, we're trying to make each other better, each other safer. And Tim was super passionate about that. And he's just all around great guy. I know he impacted so many people. We have some video testimonials that have been sent in to us, just talking about Tim and how they changed the trajectory of their organization and their lives. You know, Jay McAnally. Jay met, and he'll talk about this some in his video, but you know, Jay met Tim back in, I think, 2010, before the 2011 super outbreak.
Right.
And went through his 3-day course at Berry College.
Okay.
And it just changed completely how they did disaster response. You know, Tim saved so many lives that he couldn't even count how many lives he's saved through his safety. And how many lives has
changed since? Because if you think about even just our little organization and how it's changed us to now change the people that volunteer with us.
Right.
And then if they go and do more, I mean, just it spirals out.
Keeps going,
so many more people. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously very sad that he's no longer with us. However, I know for a fact that his legacy will continue.
Yeah.
You know,
when he put it in good hands. People like you, people like Chris, you know, David, those guys are trainers as well.
Right.
They train others. And I've sat in David Breeden's one of his presentations when he at
for the Georgia Arborist
Association, and he was phenomenal.
Right.
I learned so much in 30 minutes with him that, you know, if he's even sharper now, knowing Tim and continuing this, just what an amazing opportunity that is for people to learn from these people and learn even better than they were before.
Right. Yeah, it's you know, it's one of those things that we've really strived in our organization is to take that super seriously, what he's taught.
Even to the point of probably annoying ourselves and our volunteers.
Right. But, you know, I was like, we always say I'd rather somebody be a little bit butthurt at me in the moment than to be injured or something, you know. And Tim was the same way. You know, he's that kind of a coach where if you were doing something in the field, you know, he's kind of standing over you, watching you. You're walking him through what your plan is, and he'd be like, "Now, let's stop and think about this."
Right.
You know, and then when he said something like that,
you sure about that?
Yeah, you're like, "Oh man," you know, you have to really, really pick your plan apart.
Right, because you're talking to an expert too, so you want to make sure you tell him exactly like, all right, here's what I should have been doing. Here's this, you know.
Right. So that's one thing that made the Legacy program so awesome. I'm so thankful, so blessed to have been a part of that last Legacy program. There's only two. He was only able to do 2 Legacy programs. And so, you know, we caught the last one.
And he put so much work into that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I got to sit in on that first session with you. We sat on your couch and watched it. And just to see the work and the time and the effort and passion he put in to this, it's worth honoring. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And it's inspiring too. You know, very, very inspiring, actually. So, we just, you know, we want to pay tribute to Tim. Obviously, we want to remember Laura, his wife, you know, in our prayers, and their whole family. You know, it's definitely a hard time. I'm super thankful for YouTube, though, and to kind of be able to go back and hang out with them, you know, occasionally.
It's all still there.
And revisit a lot of those topics.
Yeah.
So
what do you think about, all right, so talking about topics.
Right.
You've learned a lot from him. You've passed a lot of that knowledge on to me and our other volunteers. What's something that is just like absolutely fundamental that if you could just tell people right now, like this, if you learned nothing else, learn this and take this into practice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like 3 things that come to mind, but one trumps all of them. Yeah. But I will talk about each 3 of these things. The first one is having a plan. The planning aspect of running a saw, especially in a storm environment, is the most important thing.
Yep.
Obviously PPE, which I'm going to talk about, is very important, but PPE does not replace a well thought out plan.
Right.
And that is what he harped, and that's what we harped to our volunteers, and that's why we spend so much time in the field talking about our 5-step felling plan and our 5-step cutting plan.
Yep.
The planning process is the most important thing, because that is the opportunity to look at the situation, not rush into it and just start cutting and see what happens. You take a step back, you assess your hazards, right? If we're talking about the 5-step felling plan, we're going to assess our hazards. We're going to assess our height and the lean of the tree, and then hazards including and targets, things that could potentially injure you, widowmakers, all that stuff. Yeah. That kind of influences where you want to put the tree, right? And so height and the lean then comes into that as the second part. Define your escape route. And I love what he would teach us is to, get at least 16 feet from the stump, 45 degrees to the good side. And the good side is, is there a hazard obstacle that's preventing you from going one direction or the opposite direction of any side lean in the tree, right? Because if the hinge fails, gravity takes over, you want to make sure that you're escaping to the good side of the tree. Right. And then after that, plan your face cut. Open face. Yep. That's what we teach. Yeah, 80% hinge length of the diameter of the tree. Yeah. And so that 80% sets the depth of your face cut, right? And to a lot of people that feels really shallow almost. You see a lot of the guys on YouTube like cutting these huge face notches like almost like halfway through the tree, and everything. It's not necessary. Yeah. That the 80% rule gives you a lot of real estate to work with, especially when you choose your back cut and implement that back cut, which is the final step of the plan. And we teach the bore cut. There's obviously you can still use a standard back cut, but we like to teach the bore cut because if you can master that, you can handle a lot of hazardous situations that way, and that demonstrates that you have a lot of control of the saw. To be able
and control of the tree at that point.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. So, that planning process, and even when it comes to limbing and bucking, a lot of it's kind of similar, a little bit different than the felling plan, but, the process is to slow down, take account of your hazards, and try to think a couple of steps ahead of the outcome, right? Or the outcome that you're aiming for.
From your planned outcome.
Right.
Work backwards from, this is where I want this tree to fall. Yeah. This is where I want this. Now work your plan.
Yeah, and it's he was so strong on that planning aspect, and that's really important because I know a lot of us guys get gung ho, want to crank the saw. Who's the first to put a pair of chaps on and crank the saw?
Get to work, right?
Yeah.
Well, and especially in storm relief, you're looking at how fast can I help this family?
Right. I got to maximize my time here. It's like we're only here for 4 days. How many homeowners can we help out? How many families can we impact while we're here?
Can't help any if you're hurt.
Right. And that's a huge thing right there. So the planning process, first thing that sticks out in my mind. Yeah. The first thing we talk about. And then the other thing is PPE. Gosh, I could go off on a tangent and just get all fired up about the fact that people just especially on social media. Well, a helmet's not going to stop a falling tree. No, you're right. Helmet's not going to it's not going to save your life when a 6,000-pound log falls from 20 feet and lands on top of you.
Sure,
but it will save your life when a 4-inch branch widowmaker breaks off above you and hits you in the head. Yeah. Where otherwise, if you didn't have that helmet on. It goes straight through your neck, from the top of your head, and it's like, you're not going to save yourself from the tree. That's where your planning process comes in. Right. But for those unforeseen smaller issues, that's where PPE shines. Right. And to me, it's it's just dumb not to wear that to prevent something that in your mind might be minor, but can cause devastating effects to your body and ruin the rest of your life. Right. When you could just you don't have to throw a Protos on. You throw a $70 helmet that meets the ANSI standards, and you're good. It's like the cheapest insurance. So, and I love the story that Tim tells about PPE. Where it originated from, in Europe, where the logging industry is kind of like their biggest export, especially in like Sweden. And you have the socialistic government. The government pays for the medical bills and the hospital stays and all that stuff. And they're paying an egregious amount. This is like back in the 70s, paying an egregious amount to keep their people, to get them rehabilitated.
People were getting injured.
Right.
Yeah. How do we stop this?
How do we stop that? So they put a committee together, looked at it, and they're like, okay, what if here's the most common accidents. What if we implemented some type of equipment, safety equipment, that protected them from these types of injuries?
Right.
And they figured out what kind of PPE they wanted. They implemented it. They bought it for everybody in that industry, but required it. Yeah. And after that, I saw like a 75% decrease in those same injuries, and it was way cheaper to purchase PPE for everybody in the country who was in that industry than to pay out medical bills. Yeah. And
when you look at it, it's none of it's original. It's not like these were some original thoughts. I mean, people have been wearing helmets long before the 1970s. Yeah. People have been wearing chaps long before the 1970s for horse riding and whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different things, gloves that you use for PPE that when you think about it, it's really common sense.
Right, it is.
But
and it's just it's one of those things. And
nobody wants to wear it.
Nobody wants it. It's hot. It's uncomfortable. I get it. Some of your movement, you're not as flexible. You can't do a backflip, in your PPE. You're wearing your chaps.
You don't have to worry about how fast you can escape the tree if you planned correctly and are wearing your PPE.
Yeah, I mean, so it's that's another big thing. It's so simple, but the PPE is kind of, in every owner's manual, PPE is like the first thing that's discussed, right? And it's our first module.
Yeah.
It's just like you said, it's kind of basic common sense. But speaking of the owner's manual, that's the third thing I wanted to bring up. So we got the plan, we got PPE. And
so before we leave PPE then,
all right,
let's just go through, just because you can never get enough reminder.
The requirements.
Required PPE.
Right. There's one item that's technically not in the ANSI standards that as a required like PPE, which is gloves, but we require it in our organization.
My hands can tell you why you should wear gloves.
Right, especially when sharpening a saw, right? That's like, especially when sharpening. But honestly, like when you're grabbing brush and stuff, like why not?
Oh, no. Sunday afternoon, I was breaking brush to throw it into my fire pit, and I jammed something right into my pinky. I looked down, and I had bled all the way down my arm in 3 minutes.
Right.
And I could have worn gloves, but it was hot outside.
Right.
So I didn't want to wear gloves.
Right.
And,
I mean, we could probably tell so many countless little stories about where stuff could have been prevented. But, so if we're going down the list, helmet, hard hat.
Start at the top.
Right, start at the top. And then you have eye protection, ear protection. A lot of those are combined now in the arboriculture industry, which is super nice. And then you have chaps.
Yep.
Or chainsaw pants, some kind of UL certified that meets the standards. And then boots. Doesn't have to be steel-toed. I know we recommend steel-toe, just because of the weights that we're dealing with and stuff like that. But it's not a requirement. But some type of sturdy sole, closed-toed, obviously. You don't want to run chainsaws in Crocs. But
probably been done.
Oh, yeah. I can count probably a bunch of storm chasers. Cut trees in the road wearing Crocs. You know who I'm talking about. No.
Right.
And then gloves. Like I said, gloves are not required as far as the ANSI standard goes, but we do require.
Well, there's certain times when you do. I mean, if you're just cutting something on the ground and you're doing a lot of dragging brush away, it works. If you're doing one cut and you need good grip on the saw,
right?
Sure, skip the gloves that time.
And if we're talking about gloves specifically, gauntlet style gloves are not recommended. Something that holds tight to the wrist is recommended because in the gauntlet style, especially when you're dealing with a chipper, when you're feeding a chipper and you got that open flare, you can get something caught in there and it can pull you in, and that's a very bad day. Those are kind of the basic PPE requirements. We recommend some additional ones, some type of high vis outerwear. Our biggest thing, the next thing I tell people all the time when we do these trainings, don't go out and buy the next biggest saw after you get your PPE. Invest in comms.
Yeah.
the Bluetooth communication systems. There's a bunch of different types out there. We use Cardo.
Yep.
We're not sponsored by Cardo or anything, but we use Cardo. We like Cardo. But that ability to hands-free communication while making timed cuts or just in a dangerous situation, to be situationally aware. Bluetooth comms are
we've been
just
in
a game
spots
changer.
where you've got 4 people on comms, and every person has a different role in the felling of that tree.
Right. Somebody might be doing ropes.
Right.
Got
ropes,
setting a
you got
redirect.
the heavy equipment operator.
Right. You got the safety officers watching for those overhead hazards, and you got the actual operator, making the cuts. And so having that extra layer of situational awareness,
It's changed our game completely.
Man.
Completely.
It's
and
incredible.
Like if you look at this past weekend, we didn't have them.
Right.
They
we didn't
weren't
have
working right. We didn't have it linked up.
Right.
And it was complicated.
It was
hard.
Yeah.
It gets loud, and you're trying to yell at somebody. And just,
right. And we're not perfect. Hindsight, we probably should have stopped and resynced everything.
Yeah.
Just be honest.
No, I agree.
Right.
I agree because there were moments I got frustrated because I wanted to just be like, "Hey, Warren, I'm going over here to do this." Just so you know, you texted me at one point.
Yeah, I was like, "Are you good?
Are you good?" And I had just gone to go sharpen a saw.
Right.
Now, granted, there was a reason it took me so long to sharpen that saw.
Right.
But
digging trenches.
Bill looking at you.
Yeah, he heard that. Just kidding. No. But yeah, I mean, the Bluetooth stuff's awesome.
Yeah.
And then outside of PPE, the third thing is the owner's manual.
Yeah.
When we do these training classes, we ask everybody who here has read the owner's manual of their chainsaw, and you might get 1 or 2 hands.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, and I love how Tim always used to say this, he made a good living teaching people what was in the owner's operator manual published by the chainsaw manufacturer. It's all there.
It's all there.
Read it.
I write manuals for a living.
Right.
All right. So read the manual.
Yeah, absolutely read the manual.
Yeah.
It's got a ton of information in there about the planning process, hinge setup, face cuts, back
and
cuts.
that's not even specific to your chainsaw. I mean,
Right.
Steel for decades has been putting best practices for tree felling or just tree cutting in their manual.
Every single one of them got it.
And it's like a whole training class in there after you get to the part about all the actual details of the equipment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, that's specific to chainsaw safety. Obviously, we could spend several episodes, and we will probably in the future
Absolutely
dissect some of these topics like a little further, and get into the nuances. One day I'd like to actually sit down and talk about the 5 modules that we have in our training program and go in as like one module an episode.
Yeah.
And go into the weeds of it, talk about, real world scenarios, stuff that we've witnessed, break down things online maybe that we see that apply to those specific modules.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really cool.
Like that one you sent me on Instagram the other day.
Yeah.
The guy cutting on the hill
and it flings them, 20 feet in the air or whatever. I mean,
the other view was amazing.
Yeah, he cartwheeled.
Like there were 2 cameras on there.
Yeah, one was a homeowner
I
and one was...
watched it, and then I kind of looked away, and then I glanced. I was like, wait. I started it back over and then saw the second view.
Right.
Whoa.
And none of these are to, like, bring down or poke fun at people.
No.
It's, I think, super important because we're not perfect. We make mistakes.
Idiot number 1.
Right, we make mistakes all the time when we go in the field. We try not to, but I think it's important as an industry, especially disaster response, because of the situations we're in, to really look at some of these accidents that happen in the field and kind of reverse engineer them. What could have been done differently to prevent that, and hopefully we can learn from those. I don't want to, bring anybody down at all. But I think awareness is super critical for what we're doing. So, talking about safety, I mentioned the 3 things that come to my mind, especially through Tim's instruction. Yeah. Is there anything that comes to your mind that's at the forefront when you think of chainsaw safety? It could be, what I've said already too, or something else.
One thing that I was thinking about, and I think about a lot now since I've learned about it, is, once the tree's down, I have been struck by multiple trees, and two of the times was because I did not know nor did I understand going base to tip
Right.
on the tree.
Yeah.
I had one. I ended up inadvertently nicking a kickstand. The tree flipped off the kickstand, hit me in the back, and threw me about 6 feet away.
Right.
Thankfully, the saw went further.
Right.
you
Right.
know? But because I had cut it and then it hit me and it just all. But we've implemented that in the field.
Yeah.
And we
try to use that as much as possible.
every chance you get. Some trees you certainly have to work
a different way, right?
And then go back to it. But it's changed everything. Just so you think about the safety factor and some of the trees that we see that are either, on homes or just massive trees in yards.
Right.
That has changed everything for me and thinking about, and even like, okay, say you work to this point, but the tree split.
Right.
You now have 2 bases.
Yeah.
And you've got to go work up one, work up the other one. And sometimes you go, you know what? I got to go back to this one and finish because you're constantly
They might
thinking,
intertwine again like
you're
later on.
thinking
You're
about how the tree can shift and roll. When you take out that underbrush, because, when you see a tree on the ground, you don't see the other half of it that's laying underneath under the canopy, so.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about working butt to tip as much as possible is the amount of trunk weight you eliminate quickly, right? So, I mean, all the gravity is what drives our compression and tension forces. And the more mass that you can remove from a tree, the less force you have later on as you're working. And also another benefit to working that way is the tree tends to get lower to the ground. Like you might have a leader that's 20 feet up in the air that you can't even physically get to.
Right.
But by the time you get to that section of the tree, you've worked up 30 feet of the tree and it's laying on the ground now.
Or you might have been able to cause safely the tree to shift to where it settle in, and that leader's now only 3 or 4 feet off the ground.
Right. You can get to it without stretching. You're not supposed to work above shoulder height. That's another big thing. And there's I love that. I love the and it's sometimes can be counterintuitive. A lot of we were working from, I would say tip to butt, but really we were working from outside in a lot. We'd tackle it from the outside. We had multiple people working on the same tree, and just got really, really messy.
Creates a lot of chaos.
It does. And so this way simplifies things a lot. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Tell me.
Right.
Tell me. Especially, you look at that tree we did most recently down in South Carolina. You were off with a couple volunteers doing another tree. Bill and David and I arrived, and we had to make a plan. Yeah. Because we knew you were 30, 45 minutes out.
Right.
We already had assessed via pictures what we had with that leader that was going about 45 feet up into the air.
Yeah.
And even just working butt to tip, we could have spun that tree in a direction, the way it was leaning, right into their shed.
Right.
So we had not only that, but we had, physical obstacles we had to work around. So we made a plan, and the plan involved creating out of a chunk of the canopy.
Right.
This would cause no movement of the tree as a whole after, climbing through it and kind of assessing it. We ended up removing a bunch of the canopy on one side so we could get the lift in. Right. Which create, so
multiple steps and then once we got the leaders taken care of, like you said, we almost had to deal with some of those like individual trees because they were so large. A huge water oaks, like 6 feet in diameter. Some of the leaders were 28 inches in diameter and 40 feet tall, like you were talking about. And one leaning over a structure. Like you said, sometimes you have to go do a different part of the tree just to be able to set up in order to take what's highest priority. And so once we dealt with those tall leaders, then we were able to to start
the real world.
The real world. So and you had to treat each leader like its own.
Every one of them.
Every
tree, single one of them.
It was such a big tree. So no, that's really
pretty sure
really
we'll
cool.
be talking about that tree.
For
years to come.
Yeah, it was a monster. And I think another one you wanted to talk about a little bit was working around a skid steer.
Yeah.
As far as safety goes.
We had, I've gotten comfortable working around the skid steer.
Right.
Working around heavy equipment. I'm used to it. I know to listen. I know to look out. But there's a lot of situations whereby we will cut something, prepare it, and the skid steer will drive in.
Right.
And I'm just standing there right next to it, lifting it up, loading more on, whatever we need to do. And then you had a situation happen behind me. I was dragging brush over to the big pile.
Thankfully, nobody was around. And I mean, like you said, it's something to think about.
Talk
for sure.
about it. I mean, it's
so it's
it made me want to reevaluate how we handle safety around heavy equipment.
Right. I think there definitely needs to be a lot more respect around things that are hydraulically operated.
And weigh 16,000 pounds.
Right. We had this situation where I was moving a branch or multiple branches to the pile at the side of the road, and the way everything settled when I went to dump, a stick, not super forcefully, just kind of snuck its way into the cab, and didn't hit me or anything, but wedged itself between the glass of the skid steer and the and the left joystick. And the left joystick controls drive movement on the Kubota,
drive
right?
Direction,
And so it basically forced the joystick into the left.
Into the left,
And just the skid steer spun, or was about to start, spinning basically. I was able to basically make it a 180 before I could kick the stick out, and hindsight, I should have just lifted the lat plates to start but sometimes you don't think about those sort of things in the moment. And so that's another thing to really think about, is to train ourselves, even our volunteers. In a situation like that, it should be instinctive to have the machine
flip it up,
to shut the machine down.
But even working around it, we need to establish a radius or something whereby, unless you've been given direction by the operator to walk over, who's in full control and the skid's not moving, to, load more branches on before they go, because sometimes they fall off or whatever during the lift process.
I know a lot of times when people load the grapple with small stuff, I always pull the lap things up or set the park brake. Just that way the hydraulics and the handles or the sticks are disengaged.
Everything's stuck.
And I think it's good practice. But, in the comments, we'd love to hear kind of, tree care companies or disaster response ministries, whatever. How do you guys handle working around equipment? There's some things that we want to think about.
Because we want to establish our own rule. Because if I had been standing any closer to you,
could have been bad.
It could have been bad.
I guess, so it took you off your feet or something at least, So, we try to think through things as much as possible. We're not perfect though, and so we'd love to hear what everybody else is doing as well. I think together we can make everything safer, and I know that's what Tim would want. Yeah, everybody to be safer and to think through those things. So if anybody, I'll put a link in the description of Tim's website and YouTube channel. Just amazing stuff. I mean, you can go on Facebook right now and see just how many people praised
the
Tim
comments
and just the impact that he left. I mean, it's huge.
Safety's not fixed. It's all of the things that we've talked about up till now have been kind of fixed rules with safety. Every situation's different. Yeah. Every tree is different. Everything you face in the field is different. Yeah. And you're constantly learning, but you have to constantly be looking out for opportunities to be safer.
Right. It's like every tree situation, every storm situation, doesn't really matter if it's tree related, you're rebuilding a house, you're doing a muck out, anything related to disaster response, and really anything kind of in life in general. Comes with risk. Yeah. And you look at the situation and you have an acceptable amount of risk in your head. Yeah. Or an acceptable amount of risk that you're okay with and that industry standard is okay with. Right. And you find ways to meet that threshold. Right. Right. And that's you can't eliminate all risk. There's no way to eliminate 100% of the risk, right? So you have to bring it down to a level that the lowest possible that is acceptable.
Yep.
That's how firefighters look at fighting fires. You have to assess the situation, understanding that the only way to reduce the risk completely is to not show up and respond.
Right.
That's the only way.
Yeah.
Right. But there are things you can do, planning process, PPE, whatever.
Well, and then you think about when you're on a disaster and you have multiple team members out there working. You can be as safe as you want.
Right.
And you can follow every rule in the book, but you have to trust that everybody else that you're working alongside has also done that.
And that's part of culture.
Yeah.
And that's something, we're trying to develop in our ministry. And, hopefully as an industry as a whole, we're moving in that direction where everybody is safety focused and in a loving way too, because I get really discouraged when I see people just like keyboard warriors and just tearing people apart, over something. And then they get defensive. And it's like, as an industry, we need to move forward, in a safety mindset, but at the same time, not absolutely clobber each other, and be hostile.
No,
right?
No
we don't make any. Yeah, we don't make any progress.
I think the worst sound that we hear while doing disaster relief is an ambulance.
Right.
Like,
you don't know, right? Where's that going?
I'll never forget. We were in Clarksville.
Yeah.
And we were working on a tree on a property, and on the in Clarksville, kind of hilly city, and obviously after the tornado, there were a lot less trees. You could see further, and the next road over, watching an ambulance go screaming down the street. And I looked at your wife, Leah, who was standing right next to me. I said, that was a volunteer.
That was a volunteer. And I think it ended up being a volunteer. I don't remember exactly what happened, whether it was chainsaw related or trip and fall or something like that. But yeah, that culture of safety is definitely super important in disaster response, and we want to be held accountable too.
Yeah,
absolutely. We're not like the safety czar or something. We don't do everything perfect.
Yeah.
And so that's why we love learning from other Tim. That's
Absolutely.
why we love learning from
other people.
Right, exactly.
We've learned a lot from a lot of different people at times. Yeah,
and I think together we can all make this as safe as possible while at the end of the day, we're trying to love on people.
Yep.
We're doing something that's dangerous in order to reach people in need. And so we want to keep doing that. And the one way to keep doing that is to make sure that we don't kill ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't help anybody if you're hurt.
Right.
It just really can't. So.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we're going to be praying for Tim's family, for Laura. His memorial service is coming up. I know there's going to be a lot of people there that he's impacted. His legacy will continue to live on for decades to come, and we're going to keep preaching what he taught us.
Yeah.
And, we love him a ton.
It's cool that we get to be a part of continuing it for him.
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. So I feel very honored and blessed.
It is a blessing to do this.
It is.
It is. We're blessed to get a chance to do this.
Right. So
I think about that all the time when we're out there, just like, man, I'm blessed to be out here to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Me too. Well, that'll conclude this episode. Episode 5. We have Carly coming up soon, and we're going to be filming with her. Super excited. Talk a little bit about some of the mental health and first getting to know her more. Right. She's local here to Georgia. Yep. She's a tornado nerd like I am, like you are. I mean, so I'm sure
I don't know that I'm in the category the two of you are in.
Well,
so I might just facilitate you guys talking and just
right. Well, we're super excited to have her on.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
We'll have more shortly. Take care, guys.
Well, this is Ed Hultgren over here in Southwest Missouri, and I'm grateful that you invited me to send a little video to give some tribute to a great man, Tim Ard. I grew up on a big ranch. We cut down a lot of trees growing up, and those trees kind of went in the direction we wanted them to in spite of what we were doing, not because of what we were doing. So I'm very grateful for the training I have had through Tim Ard. My first class with him was in 2015. I got to spend 3 days with him, and man, I peppered him with questions because I wanted to be not only a good operator, I wanted to be a good instructor. So I rode with him every day to lunch in his car and just peppered him with questions the whole time. He was very patient, talked with me, helped me become not just a better sawyer, but like I said, a better instructor. Now, I have a nonprofit and I work for a big nonprofit, and I'm able to train people who have never had a saw in their hand to be better sawyers. And those people are taking the methods that Tim learned from Sirens in Norway, and now people who have never handled a saw are being safe. They're helping their neighbors after storms, and what better feeling than have that little old lady stressed out in the morning because she doesn't know what she's going to do with all those oak and hickory trees in her yard, and then in the evening she's hugging all of our necks because we cleaned up her yard for free and we did it safely. We all made it home. So again, I pay tribute to Tim Ard and the legacy he has left with all of us. I know that we all feel blessed having been around him. He's made us all better sawyers, better instructors, and for me personally, a better man, a better friend. We'll miss you, Tim. See ya.
Hey, my name is Jay McAnally. I am with the Disaster Response Alliance, a group that's been around for about 20 years now. And Warren's asked me to share a little bit about our mutual friend, dear friend, Tim Ard. Let me say this about Tim. You look back over a lifetime and you see there's those people who their influence was such that they probably changed the trajectory of your life. And I think Tim is probably one of those people for me. And I just want to share with you a little bit about my experience with Tim. Most of you know Tim started Forest Applications, I think maybe 25 years ago, maybe in 1998. Prior to that, he'd worked in various facets of the chainsaw industry as doing repair work, worked with the major manufacturers, and probably knows more about this chainsaw industry than anybody did. We've been doing this work since Katrina. We've done chainsaw work. We've done supply and distribution of needed materials all across the Southeast. And as we got further along, we all realized that we needed a professional training, not somebody that had run a chainsaw their whole life, but we needed a pro. We found Tim and found out that Tim was going to have a training class just down the road from us over in Rome, Georgia. So it was on the mountain campus of Berry College, 28,000 acres, the largest college campus in the entire world. Numerous tornadoes had come across that property in years past, one recently, so there was recent blowdown. We would actually be doing the training. Some of my friends at First Baptist Woodstock, through a fire chief there, had found out about Tim, and so we made the connection, found us a place to stay on the campus, the mountain campus of Berry College, and we attended this training class. We learned pretty quick. Tim had a no-nonsense approach to chainsaw. He was strict, might be even a word, about what he taught us, about how we had to take things very seriously, pay close attention to what he said, because there would be a quiz and there would be tests along the way. So he also had a great sense of humor that those two intertwined made it a most enjoyable time. We didn't realize that we'd go into a classroom first thing. We were ready to get dirty and see chips fly, but we went into a classroom. They were one of the buildings at Berry College, and it was kind of like the Vince Lombardi. This is a football. This is a chainsaw. And one of the things I'll never forget, he pulled out something like this. I think it was a smaller version. Warren calls it with Science Project, actually makes these now, but it was incredibly helpful. Most of us never really thought about how the wood actually gets cut. He talked to us about the raker, the cutter head, the angles, the entire way this thing worked, how the chain, how you come up with pitch and various terminology, what it all meant. Incredibly helpful it was. Backing up on just about the topic of chainsaws, I got my first chainsaw in 1989. I lived in Nashville, was cutting firewood, and wanted to cut firewood and had to drive like 60 miles south to Columbia, Tennessee to even get a saw. It was a Sox Dolmar, maybe one of the best saws I'd ever had. I picked up a 291 steel somewhere along the way, but I went to Tim before the class. We'd gotten to know each other a bit before that, and he said, you're going to keep doing this type work. You need to go with the 362, MS362. I think that was the primary saw that Samaritan's Purse was using at the time with their disaster cleanup crews. So I was fortunate enough to have a local church donate that particular saw. We show up, we got our chaps, we got our boots, we got our head protection, and all the things that Tim told us we had to have to be a part of this training class. Most of us had, for honest, had not worn much of that gear at all in previous times of responding to disasters. One of the things I won't dwell too much on the training class, he talked to us about a plunge cut. And most of you watching this probably know what that is, where the saw goes in horizontal to the ground surface as part of a way of dropping particular trees in a way that makes it much safer. And I thought, wow, I've heard that term before. Previously, I had had a tree I wanted to cut, my dad's old cabin, Smoky Mountain National Park. And a good friend of mine, the chief backcountry ranger, comes around and says, what are you doing? I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't realize it. And he said, I said to him, what do you mean? He said, well, how are you going to cut it? And I'm like, well, I'm going to cut here and cut here. And he said, no. I said, George, how would you do it? You show me how you do it. And he started talking about plunge cuts and other things I had never heard of before. I realized immediately I did not need to drop that tree. And I went on to learn what plunge cuts were really all about. One of the things we did in that training was you always had these contests because, you know, that whole peer pressure kicks in and you want to be the one that wins this little contest because some of the gifts were pretty cool, things that we'd want to have. And one of them was he taught us how you go to a tree, you walk some distance away from it, you hold a stick out using trigonometry, looking up at the stick at a right angle that you can determine exactly where the top of the tree will fall. So, and then we had to take a little stick and stick it in the ground. And then at the end of the session there on that, we determined who won. And I won. I came closer to it than anybody and ended up getting a Elvex protective hat with ear protection, eye protection. I've always remembered that. After that time, became good friends with Tim and Laura, Laura, and I would go up and see them at their little farm there in in Rome, near the airport. And I think Laura was raising alpacas or llamas, maybe both. And I needed something sometime, or asked him just a question, and he'd say, you know, why are you asking this? And he found out I needed something. He'd just say, come on up to Rome. I got plenty of those. I'll help you out. That's just who Tim was. So time goes by. This is what I really want to connect with, is this part of what I want to share is time goes by. We've done a lot of this type work. We have relaxed on our safety and what we're wearing. And there's a tornado. Very few people knew about it. It came through Rockmart, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And tremendous damage. And we made a contact. We knew the sheriff in Polk County. We came up, law enforcement there, sheriffs showed us around, took us, did assessment, took us to the locations, and we did work. And doing what you do with Facebook at that point in time, we had to take pictures and let everybody know what a grand job we were doing. Those pictures, all over Facebook, most of them that I had taken, Tim saw them and he was exceedingly unhappy, and he should have been. We were on roofs. We were cutting with chainsaws, some of us with chainsaws over our head. Very few people were wearing any protective gear. Multiple people would be cutting on the same log. Some of you that know about this, those are things you just don't do. And he called me out. And I mean, in no uncertain terms and somewhat harsh terms, but which was necessary, you know, blasting us. And it needed to happen. But it made some of us mad. It made me mad. And I had to process it over the months. And I realized what we were doing was so wrong. We were showing other people the wrong way to do this, and others might come along behind us and get hurt. We might get hurt. We would have gotten hurt in the future had we continued that way. So not long after that, I began to look at, we got to do this differently than what we're doing right now. We implemented our own training, and a protege of Tim Ard's, Warren Causey. Warren and I are a generation apart. He went to school with my children. He's gone through training with Tim Ard, what they call a legacy training, to do training like Tim does. And so Warren, being a pro certified arborist, he starts doing our training. We changed the way we operate. We've changed the way we operate because of Tim calling me out. That includes chaps, boots, all kind of protection. We even require now our guys to go through 3.5 days of chainsaw training with the certified arborist. And we require now that they wear helmets. And most of our guys actually have access to these, a communication helmet. These are not cheap, but we feel like it's worth it for us to be able to operate safely. That wouldn't have happened unless Tim called me out. And, you know, it kind of bothered me that I never actually talked to him about it. You know, I could have just said, hey, man, you're right, and gone on, but I didn't. Found out later that Tim was sick. Warren called me one day. Warren stayed in pretty close contact with Tim, I guess, over the past couple of years. Traveled with him to do some training with God's Pit Crew up in Virginia. And he told me that Tim's cancer was back. And we knew before we did the training that Tim had battled cancer before he offered this type training. And he told me that Tim might not get better. So we set up a time to go just hang out with Tim. He's living in Rome and not near the airport. He's moved in closer to town. And we go sit down with Tim. And somehow I knew, I had to communicate with Tim what all had transpired about him sending those, blasting me because of the pictures and how we'd reacted. And I just kind of went over it. I said, I don't know if you remember, but this is what happened. I said, I want to thank you for that, because if we hadn't done that, we would not be doing this anymore. Somebody would have gotten killed or hurt, because we, by then, had responded to, I want to say we had maybe close to around 80 disaster response trips by that time. And we were most fortunate to have Tim call us out and start taking this very seriously. Laura was there. Tim was tired. We talked. We laughed. And again, anytime you spend time with Tim, you learn things about chainsaws. And I did. We did. Warren and I laughed. And I remember we were going to set up a podcast for the four of us and maybe some others to sit down and just talk. And that time never came about. We wish we would have made that happen sooner. Because of Tim's influence in my life, and the disaster response we've done, and now we partner with folks, we've actually completed 24 response trips to Helene September, our alliance of different teams, half of them chainsaw, half of them generators, blankets, etc. That probably wouldn't have happened without Tim's influence on the lives of several of us who lead these teams. I'll go ahead and close here. This is part of what we're doing here. I feel like is to honor Laura and honor Tim's memory. And so for Laura Ard, I just want to share our Lord and Savior speaks to the process of grieving and mourning, and Matthew 5:4 says it better than I can. So that's how I'm going to close. In Matthew 5:4, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Laura, know that we're praying for you.